from the dark recesses of my unconscious mind into the glaring light of objective reality. You are listening to the Dark Mind Podcast. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, we have a man that is as mysterious as his writing. Often referred to as the enigma of Instagram, he is the author of a novel that defies genre as well as convention. He's joining us today to talk about his novel as well as his craft. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Braedon Riddick. Braedon, welcome to the show.
Vance, thank you for having me, my man. It's a privilege.
Absolutely. It's good to have you. Just want to thank you for joining me. I know you are a father of two and a husband to one, so thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk a little shop.
Most certainly.
So I've heard you referred to as the enigma of Instagram. I personally like to refer to you as the mindscape architect because you do such a great job in your book of using setting, emotion, and pacing to produce a vivid, moving picture in the reader's mind. So, do you have a creative background either with your day job or any other hobbies that naturally lend themselves to writing fiction? Or does your ability to write just exist in a vacuum?
First off, Vance, let me thank you for that. That is outstanding to hear, and especially the way you put it. I've mentioned one time, and I don't know if it was in a post or just sharing conversationally on Instagram about how I had failed creative writing in high school. And it wasn't because I wasn't creative at the time. I certainly hadn't had my mental doors opened as much as I have now, naturally. But the reason I had failed is I had showed up the day that the seniors were supposed to present their final project. So long story short, I ended up failing the class because the teacher was inflexible in that regard. You know, and that always stuck with me. And that was the only class I ever failed. And I always said, she won't give me a chance to redeem myself, but I'm going to find a way to redeem myself. So I think slowly over time, the combination of my love for film, good quality film, David Lynch style stuff, the ambiguous, beautiful mystery that he can present. We've seen it in Twin Peaks. We've seen it in Mulholland Drive, along with some of that foundational horror, even the cheesy stuff, the 80s, you know, the Jason Voorhees, the Freddy Krueger on the film side of things. But I had never liked to write. I didn't like to read. And at first, every writer is a reader. And it wasn't until my my second stint of college when I started reading for fun, reading fiction. And that was Dean Koontz. I was introduced to Dean Koontz and just devoured book after book of his and eventually found Stephen King. And that's when it happened. That's when things were really set in motion. I got lost in one of those Dean Koontz books in one of those creepy worlds. I said, I have to find a way to recreate this in my own way, you know, using my own unique, eclectic sources of inspiration and character, recreate something like that. And day to day, no, I'm more of a man of science. If I were to put it in the archaic Lovecraft way of speaking, I'm more of a numbers guy. So the creative arts, it kind of, it's serendipitous in a sense, completely unrelated to my day to day and what I would normally, develop in the normal routine of things. Excellent question though. And I hope that answers it.
Yeah, absolutely. So You said in an interview that your inspiration to write the book, Ungodly, began with a vision of a figure in a tower illuminated by a red light. Basically, the first thing that Amanda Baker sees, if I'm getting that right? Okay.
That is correct.
So can you talk about the circumstances surrounding the vision, where you were, what was going on in your life?
That's another great question. As a matter of fact, I remember exactly where I was, and it was a very chill, relaxed scenario where I think I'm watching a ball game or watching something on TV in the recliner. And this has to be 10 years ago. When the initial vision struck me. And I looked to the side and I looked toward my window, and then suddenly I'm somewhere else and I'm seeing it from Amanda's perspective. And to try to define and pinpoint where such a thought originates, its source, it's a fool's game as far as I'm concerned. I can't tell you where exactly it came from. It's let's call it a left field insight, that just came. And, I was not in the position that I'm in currently. Things were a lot more unsteady at the time. And naturally, I was writing a lot more, and it was a means of therapeutic expression. So I think the inner workings, the mental wheels were turning and potentially exploring things of that nature a little more. So that might have led to it. But I was more of, I would call it experimentation of things that aren't readily discussed or actively discussed. It was a phase where, you're exploring different personas, and you hit that one where you've been introduced to a great sum of diverse sources of inspiration. You've been exposed to a lot of different mediums of art, of people, of cultures. And then suddenly it all just erupts into eventually a cohesive plan, a cohesive idea turned into a story. And, naturally it didn't come overnight. The initial vision came, and I mentioned it before on a prior podcast. It's kind of hard in retrospect to think that what is Ungodly by and large originated from that single seed, that initial vision, of Amanda Baker seeing that. And, cool that you mentioned it.
So I was, listening to you on the Reading Sirens podcast, and you had said that the novel almost didn't get published because of getting, bogged down in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, but that during the pandemic you had some downtime that you didn't normally have. So what was it like for you during the pandemic, and what were the circumstances that were the impetus for channeling what I imagine was a lot of stress into the artistic outlet of finishing the book?
It's another extremely well articulated question, Vince. Unless you were living under a rock, you experienced some degree of stress and strain when initially COVID struck, and there's the fear, there's the, people were laid off, people were unemployed. It was a state of turmoil, of unrest, and fortunately, I was still able to provide for mine, but I worked from home, and, parenting to this day, I love my two boys like nobody's business. They're my world. But parenting in a pandemic, especially two young boys, while also trying to work and manage your projects, your day-to-day affairs, that's tricky business, man. And I had to find a way to distract myself from that. And the best way, in addition to my wife always encouraging me, spurring me on about continuing with Ungodly, and then there's my editor who propelled the inspiration as well. But it was truly that outright need to immerse myself into a distraction, and it needed work. I told my editor, I said, listen, I generally don't like deadlines in my creative endeavors, but I need you to set me a hard deadline that I'm going to have this manuscript on your desk. And she did. And it was a tense period because of how much work had to be done, but I knew I needed that deadline to reach the finish line. So, I call it a silver lining, man. It's a silver lining. I've said it once. I'll say it again. I would never wish a worldwide pandemic on anyone, but some good did come from it, least of all, Ungodly. And not for my sake, but because readers said this would have been a disservice if this book was not published. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like you were kind of using the art of war strategy where the troops are backed up against a body of water, so retreat is not an option. You need that deadline.
That's exactly right. The passion was there, but you got to understand, there had been so much time and energy put in. The finished product is nowhere near what it originally was. There was a lot of work to be done. And it took a lot of time and understanding and learning how to bring the best out of the story. And, at times the motivation simply was not there, nor was the time, and a combination of those two. It lingered and it languished in a drawer, as the author's note said. So 2020, what a year, man, in so many ways.
Yeah. Good God. So who is this editor that seems like was instrumental in this coming to light? Who can we give a pat on the back for encouraging you?
Kristin Hamilton.
Kristin
Hamilton.
Okay.
Her website is Kristin Corrects, which is a very catchy as well as astute and correct website name, because she's a great editor. I'm forever grateful for her encouraging me to continue, because, even before 2020, there'd been numerous occasions that she had mentioned Ungodly and continuing to work on it. So absolutely grateful for her. And we need those external sources of motivation at times. I don't care how committed you are to any given task. Sometimes you need that pat on the back, that pat on the butt, and say, hey, come on, you put too much into this already. Finish the job.
So do you do any editing yourself as you go, or do you just leave it all to somebody that's far removed from the project?
See, that's the problem that can introduce a problem. When I initially started writing anything, and even at the beginning of Ungodly, I adopted the Dean Koontz method that is, in essence, to polish each and every page before moving on to the next.
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
Yeah. And, doing that, and initially when I started writing, concentrating on shorter fiction, even then, much shorter style fiction, or even having novel concepts in mind where I'm trying to pace for the purpose of a novel length piece. And you doing that, you get through 10, 15 pages and I'm like, geez, man, I'm burnt out on the story. And worst of all, I lost a sense of story, worrying so much each and every page, polishing it to the nth degree that it burned me out on the concept itself. And I lost a sense of story so often. And early on in Ungodly, there might have been maybe a chapter or two that was similar to that. But ultimately, once it got rolling and once enough characters were introduced and the scene began to set itself and then events were unfolding, because once I set the scene and the pieces are in place, then things are going to start moving. There's enough kinetic power and energy from different angles that things are just going to start moving. So, once that happens, there's not a lot. It's just going with it. I was able to write more free flow and concentrating on story as opposed to polishing every word, every sentence and paragraph on every page. And that's an acquired sense of style, Vince, that it took me failing in other projects that I buried and just put away, threw in a junkyard, so to speak. But it was because of losing a sense of story and getting burned out, concentrating too much on the polishing as I go.
Yeah, I remember seeing that interview with Koontz when he was explaining that process. And I remember thinking, wow, that sounds like such a beautiful way to do it, kind of like a sculptor, just, making multiple passes. But in practice, I can totally see that derailing the flow by just kind of every page just becomes this rut you get into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you write yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You write. And now I don't know if you published anything, but I've heard some of your audio.
Mm-hmm.
Have you put out anything in print?
No, nothing in print yet. Yeah, I've never really thought about that. It would probably be better in print because I'm honestly the stuff I put out in audio. I'm wondering if I'm going to get kicked off of the directories or my podcast host for it being too graphic. But there's plenty of what you would call splatterpunk out there that they have no problem putting it in print and getting it published and distributed. So
that is true.
Maybe that would be the way to go.
There's a market for every book out there, Vince.
Mm-hmm.
You know that.
Oh yeah,
there is.
Yes.
The only question is how long it takes to find it. That audience. Yeah.
Well, so how long did it take you? I mean, this might be a difficult question because it sounds like it spanned over quite a few years in different stages. But how long would you say collectively it took for you to write Ungodly?
It is a tough one, Vince, because there was starts and stops, that sudden availability to write, the sudden urge when momentum was gone. And then not to mention, I've got to keep this in mind. Two major life-changing events took place after I began the story. The first of which was getting married. I'm still happily married. She still puts up with me. I'm grateful for that. And then there was having our first child. So you're talking two big time life-changing events.
Absolutely.
And let me assure you, when that child comes, I had always been told how much it changes your world, but until you experience it firsthand, you do not understand. I mean, your world is turned upside down. So there was a stint after our firstborn came about that I simply could not write at all. And when I got back to the story, it was so dark. Because where I left off, as a matter of fact, is right after Amanda Baker had that run in. It was the end of part 2 when Amanda had just avoided the bad violence at the Hebelo house. And then she took off into the night. That's where I came back to. And I was like, how do I?
That's quite a cliffhanger.
Yeah. I said, where do I go from here? My wife just brought this beautiful human being into the world. And this is where I come back to, So fortunately, not right after that, I don't think, but soon after, we're introduced to Brian Jackson. And I'll be honest with you, Vince, Brian and Will's relationship and their banter and their romance, if you will, that kind of got me back into it. I needed a sense of levity. I needed a sense of something lighthearted. Having just been introduced to our firstborn child, I needed something that was a little bit light to get back into a story that was already so dark and heavy, and not to mention where I had left off. So Brian and Will's humor got me back into it, and then it's a roller coaster. It has its highs and lows in terms of emotion and a sense of mood. There's humor and there's certainly a lot of darkness, but definitely then humor was needed on my end.
Were there points in the book where there's something, particularly sinister or dark happening where you've had to okay, I need to put this down for the day or for the week because it's just kind of affecting your psyche a little too much?
Absolutely. And I've never experienced a writing zone so intense as when Karen Hebelo met her demise. And I remember when I emerged from the experience, it was so eerie, the feeling, because I had never experienced anything like that. And I had to get out of the house. I'm writing on my phone because I'm listening to music and I can still remember the song. And in fact, sometimes I'll reread that scene listening to that song. But of course I can never recreate the initial experience because that was that first time. That was that initial creation of it. But definitely that scene, I had to put it away. And when I got back to it the next day, when I reread it, the word that came to mind, as I mentioned in that prior podcast you might have heard, was ungodly. And that's where the name came about, because it was truly an ungodly scene. And it disturbed me that I had conceived that, and it was the zone in which I wrote it that was, it's one of those things. I've experienced, playing basketball or something where I'm just hitting every shot. I feel like I'm throwing a ball into the ocean, as the saying goes. But never had I experienced something on the writing side of things where everything is just so clearly seen and conveyed, because that's the hardest part for me as a writer, is seeing the image in my head, effectively translating that onto paper or on the screen for a reader. How can I make them see what's in my mind and make it as vivid as possible? And I've heard nothing but that scene was extremely vivid and intense from feedback. And but definitely that there were probably other moments in the book, Vince, definitely some of the more emotional moments where, you know, you get in these characters' heads and you feel it, and it takes its toll. Even if it's fictional, it takes its toll, because ultimately you may not realize it at the time, but you're exercising a demon of your own. It may be faceless at the time, but soon enough, you'll identify what that was. And, and that's really what it's all about. Getting down and finding a way to find therapeutic expression and relief through the beautiful medium of fiction.
Absolutely. Well, so you kind of mentioned what my next question was going to be with writing on your phone. There's the standard laptop, but I've also heard of authors writing on old school mechanical typewriters like Cormac McCarthy, as well as Chuck Palahniuk just uses a pen and a notebook. But from actually something you posted today, I think you said you wrote 90% of it on your phone.
That's correct. That is correct.
So can you talk a little bit about what that process is like? Because that's a first for me, hearing that somebody wrote such a large amount of a novel on a phone.
And it's strange for me, even listening to it or even thinking about it now, at least compared to everyone else that I see and the device they use to write. You see a lot of typewriters, and I think that's awesome. Brittany Johnson, for one, has a typewriter that she, by the way, named Roland.
Uh-huh.
No mistake there. But yeah, so I'm going to say the first couple chapters, we meet Eldon, we meet Amanda. I'm going to say the first few chapters were most certainly all written on a laptop. But it got to a point where I did better writing on the move. And I was always so active, always going, that it was easier for me to just pull out my phone and write something down on the go, little notes here and there. And eventually that turned into, okay, well, let me take this a step further. Instead of using just a notepad or whatever, I found just before I boarded a plane to LA, I downloaded an app called iWriter. And on that flight, I wrote a scene of Amanda Baker, and really, I met her resolve, her character, and consequently, I became more connected to the story. And from that moment on, I was like, yeah, I'm going to finish this story. And now that I know I have the luxury and the convenience of writing in this handheld device anywhere I go, I said, I'm most definitely going to finish this story, because I was no longer restrained to the requirements of having to sit down in front of a desk at a laptop, at a desktop. Mm-hmm. Right. And that was the game changer. And not only that, there were times where when I would eventually get that time to sit down in front of the computer and I would be glaring at that white screen, when the time finally presented itself, I may not be in that organic flow of writing that I preferred to create. And that white screen was just so daunting and massive, at least compared to the tiny screen of a phone. So you fill up that screen of the phone so much quicker, especially on an app like I was using, that it just, before you know it, I've got a lot of data and I'm slowly but surely emailing it to me. That was my best file. And let me tell you, the worst, I would never recommend this method. Okay. I did it, but I would never recommend this, because writing it is the easy part. Formatting and keeping everything in order, that was the trickiest part. The formatting errors and glitches that would come about from that writing app when trying to convert it into a basic Word document, problems were plentiful. I'll say that. But sure enough, man, I would wager right about 90% of the novel written on the phone.
So there wasn't really anywhere that you did the majority of your writing. You felt the urge or the inspiration, the stream of consciousness came, and you just whipped your phone out wherever you were and just committed some text.
There was some times where it was like that, but don't get me wrong. Once I reached a certain point, late 2014, early 2015. I reached a point in the story where I felt so much momentum and I was drawn to the story so much. I was really eager to see where things were developing. Like I was aiming for mile markers in the story, and some of which I hit, but there were still enough opportunities and different ways for things to branch off that I wasn't entirely sure what might come about at certain junctures. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. But I reached a point where the only time, like I've got to get in at least, if I can dedicate 1 hour, give me 1 hour of time, I can finish this story. I can finish the first draft by early next year. And that was near end of 2014. I finally finished the first draft March of 2015. Again, that's 511 pages. That was a monster, overweight, but I committed to waking up at 4:30 every morning and writing until 5:30 when I had to leave the house and head to work. And I would get up. I had a steady routine. I would get that coffee brewing, and a dad at that point, appreciative of silence and a quiet house. I was able to fall into my element and create in that caffeinated silence so easily because, of course, I've got on my headphones. I'm pumping my tunes. And, by the way, I'm listening to whatever song I need to evoke a certain emotion or feeling to best write for the scene. That's what I'm listening to. Sometimes I would listen to a song on repeat 30 times in a row if I need to prolong that feeling or that vibe. I'm coming down, I'm drinking my coffee and I'm listening to my music. This is between 4:30 and 5:30 a.m. Because by that point I had gotten into such a rhythm and it was so easy writing on my phone. And once the momentum got rolling, I didn't want to say, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Absolutely.
As the saying goes. And again, it wasn't as easy for me I never liked the restraints of sitting at a desk at a laptop. I work at a stand-up desk, if that tells you anything. Yeah. Okay. So I can lower it when I need to, but I like the ability to move around and pace. I'll put on my tunes and that's how I really zone in. And especially when I'm writing or needing to zone in on what I'm working on. So that beautiful caffeinated silence, I was really able to be productive. And, that was before child number 2. So I can remember the caffeine was so much more effective at that stage of my life. Now it takes the ratio of what it takes to achieve that caffeine high is 4-1 these days.
Like 2 cups of coffee and an energy drink.
Yeah. Good stuff, man.
Well, it sounds like you have a few different ways that you adapted. Other than writing on your phone and listening to music, do you have any other tricks that you employ? Like one guy I interviewed would write a few pages, then have his computer's dictation software read his material out loud. And by hearing that, he was able to see if the writing was clunky and didn't flow well.
That is an excellent idea. And in fact, I didn't discover that until I'm going to say probably the third, maybe fourth rewrite somewhere in there. But that's an invaluable tool to use. Invaluable. Of course, you have so many options nowadays in terms of who you want to narrate your work, right? Who do you want reading these words to you? But it's critical because I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of self-editing is having it read aloud to you. Not taking advantage of that function. I don't know. I think that's a little negligent, to be honest with you. Of course, you need to read it aloud yourself to make sure that it flows and that it sounds right. And that if someone is reading this aloud, this is how it's going to sound. But you also need someone else to read it to you because you know what you're intending to say. So even if you've accidentally omitted a word here or there, in your brain, you know what you were trying to say. So you can fill in those missing words if there are any, right? But if you hear it read aloud by a program or even a real person, they'll identify that error or that missing word, right? It's beneficial in certainly more ways than one, but strongly encourage that.
Well, so I was going to ask if you outlined, and I heard you talking about mile markers. Is it more of something that you just kind of kept in your head? You're like, I don't know how I'm going to get to this mile marker, but it's going to be an interesting ride.
There were certain, yes. I don't like the idea of outright outlining. No, nothing formal, nothing structured or organized as far as, I know some guys who are extremely particular in this regard and finicky and will create Excel spreadsheets, with itemized plot points and, formulating an outline. But that's not my style. I had certain mile markers throughout the story, spaced, I should say, so far apart. I have to have some aim, right? You're not going to set sail out there on the open sea without some course and direction, right? You have to have a destination, at least a vague destination. And I had options, right? But in between those mile markers, in between those posts, spaced evenly or spaced however far apart, it's filling in the gaps. That's where the true creativity comes about. When you begin to form the meat on the bones, that's where you get surprised as a storyteller. When you start giving these characters a little bit of free will, and that may sound strange, and I always thought it sounded strange the first time I heard Dean Koontz talk about it. But again, once these characters are established and you give them free will to act and behave as their characteristics and persona would suggest they would behave, that's when the story really takes on a kinetic energy, all its own. And at one point I felt like I was being just pulled along. And that's when it was so beautiful. So much fun. Yeah. You'll have to forgive me, man. I go off on these tangents.
That's no problem. So this may shock most people that have read your book, but I really loved the character of Eldon, which may sound strange, but the reason is because I love the archetype of the anti-hero. And even though Eldon isn't an anti-hero per se, in fact, he has a very small role in the book, he has the qualities of an anti-hero. He's very flawed. He's done horrible things to his wife. He's an alcoholic, but he still has just enough humanity to mourn the loss of his son and what seems like feel genuine love when he sees him for the first time. Are your characters based on real people? And can you talk a little bit about character development?
Yet another stellar question, Vince. Oh, man. I can say this, clear cut, clean and obvious. No one has remarked on Eldon's character as you just did and expounded on what makes him unique, especially the anti-hero angle. That is very insightful. There's a lot of characters in that book. I want to say 25, 27, right around in there. And there are no doubt characters in there that reflect people I know or maybe situations they've been in, maybe qualities or traits they might possess. But by and large, I've always considered myself pretty observant. And I won't say I'm an outright people watcher because that sounds like someone who just stares. But occasionally it is good to just take a look around and be receptive to behavior and the way, folks behave around you. And, I think just my exposure to such a broad diversity of people from different walks of life and, starting out kind of in a lower situation, overcoming some odds initially, being exposed to some unfavorable situations, I should say, that I guess these separate points of exposure over time, they just kind of materialize into these characters. Again, it's one of those things that you don't necessarily see at the time of conception, at the time you're introduced to these characters, to these traits and qualities. But in the end, you begin to see this may not have been a conscious effort, but subconsciously there was clearly an impact here, and there's parallels you might draw, when you're looking back in introspection. But for the most part, I'm fortunate to say, because there was a lot of bad in that book, for the most part, not too close to home, any of those characters or scenarios. There are certainly some, but by and large, all 27 or thereabout, they were just those characters that I happened to have met in my tour of Palisade Mountain, and some were much better than others, as we learned.
So there's not a particular one that you identify with in any way?
Brian and I share certain similarities, but he's much cooler than I am. And,
I doubt it.
I don't know. He overcame a lot. He was up against some pretty tough odds, but his resilience, Amanda's resilience and sense of resolve is really the driving force behind the novel. But his certainly didn't hurt matters. And it was very inspiring to learn about him and what he had went through. And I think in the end, having went back and read that book, and I've read it a few times, of course, but front to back, when you read it truly as a reader, as best you can, unbiased, I feel like he showed signs of, his ultimate fate early on, or at least his sense of, I think he might have hinted at where he was going, if the opportunity presented itself. But for the most part, like I said, it's, qualities. Certainly there's similarities there to a few different characters, and there's certain, the sports aspect is what Brian and I are most similar in.
Well, can you tell me a little bit, something I'm interested in is the process of writing from the female perspective. How was that process, writing through the perspective of Amanda Baker?
That was probably one of the more challenging aspects initially, but that was a challenge that I had deliberately set out to do. And for one, she was the one who had initially seen the silhouette in the red room that led to the book in general. But I had written something prior. I've written a few different things, and that female perspective is, you got to be careful these days, man, especially with, there's a sense of unrest with how male authors present females, and the stereotypes. A lot of females, and rightly so, are not happy about that. So what I did was, first of all, I just took my observations, and I've got a lot of female friends, totally platonic friends that I think so highly of. And my observation of them and my listening and my attempt to understand their place, where they're coming from, came to form what I would assume Amanda Baker to be like. But I didn't stop there. Obviously I had my wife read the book long before it was published. The first draft, she was the first to read it. But I also had the presence of mind to say, well, you can't rely on your bias, because you're a male and you're going to like what you wrote, even when it was fluffy and overweight. Writers love to hear themselves talk. And that's why you're listening to me now too much. I'm kidding, man. But also I can't put too much stock in my wife and her feedback. If she says she likes it and it sounds like a genuine female perspective, because there's bias there as well. So I said, I'm going to pinpoint 3 different female editors of fairly high esteem, and I'm going to get them to provide me a manuscript assessment. Fortunately, I knew with that manuscript assessment, Amanda being the lead, certainly the female lead, I knew I would get feedback in that regard. And if I didn't, I requested it. They said that she was a likable female with a backstory that is relatable, and her actions and motivations seemed authentic. And I didn't question it any more than that. If I get 3 check marks from, and we're talking one of which, the very first, who gave me the most inspirational, motivating feedback I ever got, that really flipped my switch and made me realize that I had some talent, when she shared her feedback in regards to the story itself and my capabilities as a writer. But she especially remarked on Amanda and her backstory. And this esteemed editor was a former acquiring editor of Penguin Random House. Okay. She's seen the very best of the best. And the feedback that she shared with me, listen, man, Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant might as well have walked up to me and said, "You've got an excellent jump shot. You belong in the NBA." You know, that was the equivalent in the writing world. From that point forward, there was no convincing me otherwise, right? I knew I had something here. It was just a matter of when I was going to get the time to truly iron out all the wrinkles, make it right, and be able to sleep soundly at night. And, you know, I don't want to, I want to put out a well-polished product. And that was, you know, Amanda's character, writing from her perspective, was a crucial part of that. Thank you for asking.
Kind of a nitpicky question. What is the etymology, I guess you would say, of the moniker of Throb Walker?
Well, first off, what do you think?
I honestly, how throb is incorporated, the only thing I could think of is that there's like this refractory period where they're just completely catatonic and then they kind of throb back to life. But that's as close as I could get. And
I think that that encapsulates it pretty well. You know, it's funny. I've had a few people remark on that. They say, a buddy of mine, we chat on Instagram a good bit, and he always sends voice messages. And while he was reading, he was sending me, he was letting me know of his progress and how he was doing, what he thought here and there. He said, "Dude, throb walkers." He said, "Is that original?" He said, "That's badass, man." He said, "How did you come up with that?" You know, for one, there was the throb mentioned throughout. Isaac Lectus mentioned, you know, the sense of the throb, and it was mentioned by other characters as well, feeling that sort of gravitational pull, that sort of dull throb of a headache. And before you know it, we meet the throb walkers, man. And that was a fun sequence to write. The reanimation of the throb walkers, maybe the frozen postcard. Spoiler alert. But I've heard some good feedback in that regard. And that's cool because, you know, certain scenes you really, when you see it crystal clear on the visual front, and you hope that you translate it well onto the page, and then you get confirmation and validation by hearing it from multiple readers. That's when it really sinks in and feels good.
Well, so kind of piggybacking off of that scene you were talking about, without giving away any spoilers, at the end, the scene that involves the song "Peace in the Valley." Now, yeah. I'd never heard that song before, so I looked it up and I listened to a version sung by Randy Travis, and then I think another one sung by Elvis, because I just wanted to get a picture of the scene in my head. And the juxtaposition of calm music with intense violence is really eerie for some reason. The scene that was immediately brought to my mind that was similar was the scene in Reservoir Dogs, when the cop is getting his ears sliced off by Mr. Blonde, and you've got Stuck in the Middle with You playing in the background.
Yes.
So,
what a reference.
Yeah. How did you come up with the idea to set such a chaotic, violent scenario with that particular song?
So for one, you hit the nail on the head with that stark juxtaposition of, it's kind of like, I liken it to that evil child, that adorable on the surface child with that evil laugh when suddenly there's something ominous about it. You know, there's that evil childish giggle that just is wrong. It's out of place. In that moment, Lectus had a vision and had heard that song in that vision of, you know, Peace in the Valley. And that's one of those moments, man, kind of like the silhouette, the initial scene that inspired it all, that just came in so crystal clear, and it creeped me out because I imagined it so vividly. And I was like, this is giving me serious willies. If I just hope I'm able to translate this properly and do it justice, because if I do, it's really going to, you know, raise some hairs. And yeah, man, you hit the nail on the head. It's that true stark contrast that just, it makes things stand still. And, it's compelling, and it's just so wrong that it works, and it works pretty damn well. And I appreciate you remarking on it.
It's just like you're overcome with this weird cognitive dissonance. Like this
Yes.
isn't right, but my God, it's enjoyable.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was your intention or not, but it seems that with the two examples of Amanda being in the position she's in and Brian's actions in the climax of the book, an overarching theme of the book seems to be self-sacrifice. Am I correct in that at all?
You'd be hard pressed for anyone to make a strong argument against that. I seem to get that interpretation as well. Was that a conscious effort? No, it was not. But again, sometimes these books, without, I didn't come into this project, into the story with some type of altruistic vision, some type of illusions of delivering some grand message, of course. But ultimately, when the final period is placed and you go back and you see and you read it as a whole, the sum of its parts, and you can't help but get that impression that self-sacrifice is a essential theme of the novel. Are there others in there? Yeah, I think so. But that's most certainly, and as you mentioned, Brian's actions, that kind of solidifies that like no other instance. If there was ever any question, that kind of that confirms.
Mm-hmm. So the tower, a real eerie fixture of the story, was it metaphorical in any way?
Looking back, it's strange. It's strange even now, seeing the true purpose or the true backstory of the tower. What did we learn? We learned that it possibly of a cult construct, maybe of a military installation, some type of covert deal. I've always enjoyed some of those undercover operations, that some of those stories, even if they're just conspiracy theories or whatever, about potential means of contact made with another kind, with, I don't know, a means or an attempt to communicate elsewhere. And I think it's safe to say that we learned that this tower in the story was perceivably the means of communication, if not control, of a civilization, in a sense, to a degree. And I remember one reader remarked on it, and she had said, my writing reminded her of early Stephen King, which I certainly appreciated because he was certainly a huge inspiration. And then she went on to say that the tower made her think of the Dark Tower series and made a reference to that. The thing is, that is not true, because I actually stopped. I never even got to see the Dark Tower. I stopped after book 4, I want to say. I don't know if you've read the Dark Tower series.
No, I remember it, but I never did read it.
Yeah, extremely popular. And of course, you'll see a lot of it on the Instagram platform. A lot of books. I think it's a 7-book series, maybe another one. But I stopped at book 4, so it had really no affiliation to the Dark Tower concerning Stephen King. But it was one of those crystal clear visuals that ultimately surfaced and served a huge purpose, as we learned. And beyond that, that's one angle I would love to leave open for interpretation, with the potential of, I will not rule up a follow-up down the line to further explore that. And I would hate to show that hand too early. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh. One of the characters in the story has a problem with addiction, which I think adds a dark, compelling element to any story, not only because of the tragic nature of the affliction, but because it's so prevalent. I would venture to guess that there's no one that hasn't had an experience with addiction, either themselves or indirectly through friends and family. So it's an element of the story that most people can relate to. Do you have any experience with addiction directly or indirectly?
Absolutely. Family members. Fortunately, I haven't dealt with outright addiction. Don't get me wrong. I have my vices just like the next guy, but I've been able to manage and moderate that. Moderation is the key for me in anything. But most certainly, way too many in my circle, those close to me, have dealt with addiction, are dealing with addiction of a certain nature. And it's tough. And most certainly the presence of that in the novel was most certainly a way of my coming to terms, of reconciliation, of acceptance, maybe of learning how to accept and deal with such things, that there are certain things you can control, but the rest, all you can do is your best, and you leave it alone. The book in that regard helped come to terms with some of those that unfortunately was faced with addiction, and some of which ultimately lost the battle. And for anyone out there who is battling addiction, best wishes all the way.
Definitely. Another theme in your book is the concept of lost civilizations. It's interesting to find fossils from civilizations that no longer exist, but at the same time, it's kind of terrifying because you wonder, have we got it down? Are we going to survive and continue to evolve, or are we going to drive ourselves into extinction? So it's very good fodder for a horror story. Are there any stories, real or fictional, about lost civilizations that inspired you to inject that theme into your book?
Yes, absolutely. For one, it's the big concept, that layered, loaded mystery that revolves around an entire people gone missing, right? It's never going to not make people wonder, I feel like. So that sense of wonder, is strong in me, and most certainly Phantoms by Dean Koontz explores. So I don't know if you've read that one. Phantoms,
I don't think so.
It's predicated on the conversation of lost civilizations. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's the Roanoke mention, which has been played 3 ways from Sunday in film and in fiction, at least in some reference or mention. And beyond Phantoms, I'm sure there were a few. They're eluding me at the moment, but what could potentially be responsible for wiping out an entire civilization? We're not just talking about, a psychopath with a knife ringing doorbells or opening windows late at night. We're talking about something with the capacity of wiping out a civilization. And it was fun to explore. It got dark, obviously, and it got strange at times. It got weird, but once you start opening up those doors and you fall into a rabbit hole, you don't know what you're going to find all the time. I certainly didn't expect to find what I did, but it was well worth the ride. I'll say that.
So I've heard you speak about Stephen King and Koontz. Is supernatural thriller / horror, is that the genre you gravitate toward, or do you read any other genres?
I love suspense. I'm not crazy about hardcore extreme horror by any sense. I love suspense. I love thrillers with a degree of horror. And you read the book. It's hard to really pigeonhole that book in any one category. And that's by design. I'm too tough to contain in any one lane, any one category. I'm not big on labels in that regard. So be it. But supernatural thrillers, I do enjoy, and I love reading them. And when they're done right, man, they can be so much fun. It can be an overplayed trope. If careful consideration isn't given to the mythos, to the mythology and the spin on the why, the how, things of that nature. Because let's face it, there's a lot of supply out there. There's a lot of different ways that supernatural thriller has been spun. And, of course, in recent years, we've seen a lot of recycled stuff. I'll say this. I don't know if you've read any Adam Neville, one of my favorite books. It's an all-timer for me, The Ritual. They made a film on it. It's on Netflix. Great movie.
I think I've seen the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the guys out there in the Arctic Circle get lost, or in the Scandinavian wilderness, I guess. They go on a camping trip.
Oh, yeah.
They're out in the woods. And of course, they're not alone. They're being hunted. And the mythology behind that, it wasn't just a creature feature, a beast in the woods, something in the woods hunting them down. It was the mythology behind that, the origin, that truly, it's just fascinating. I encourage you to read it. And if you've seen the movie, I still found immense enjoyment in reading the book. And, I do wish I would have read the book prior to seeing the movie, but it is what it is. I still love the book. It's an all-timer for me. And I'm currently reading Cunning Folk by Adam Neville. And great book. But I bring it up to say, he's more of a folk horror specialist. And, because Ungodly more or less came about after reading so much of Kuntz and King, who knows? I plan on reading a lot of Adam Neville here going forward, and there may be some type of folk horror to come about. Who knows? I don't discriminate in terms of creative dark fiction, and I certainly don't want to be pigeonholed in any one category.
Yeah, Brittany Johnson went from Mississippi Blue to Maneater, went full on dark romance. I'm still waiting on my copy to come in. I've got to check that out.
Did you read it?
No, I'm waiting on my copy to come in.
Okay.
Yeah, I was able to get in when she was asking people if they wanted signed copies, so I got in, but she was waiting for all the orders or requests to come in before she sent them all out in bulk, so hopefully it'll come in this week.
Well, I look forward to reading that one. And, have you read Mississippi Blue?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Great book. Awesome book.
Mm-hmm.
And Brittany Johnson is an awesome writer. I mean, you read her book. I don't need to tell you that. And you spoke to another awesome writer, extremely smart, and that's Miss Monica Vogel.
Absolutely.
And, her scientific pedigree is just absurd.
My fiance was listening to it. She was like, "Oh my God, I can't."
Her psychological foundation, her just off the cuff, how she can spin these advanced scientific topics. It's just, I didn't get to finish the conversation that you and Monica had, but what I did hear, of course, it's Monica, and we've shared enough conversation. We've chatted, even if, just through, direct messages on the app, she can go. And she warned you and said, be careful, because if you start talking about this, I will, I can't shut up about it. And she's right. And that's, that's great to see, because that's clear evidence of passion, right, in her pursuit. And, it's clear because she is extremely knowledgeable in her field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to kind of redirect back towards, we were talking about The Ritual. Are you a fan of horror movies?
I am.
Okay.
I am. I was introduced to them way too early, man. My mom introduced me to horror way too early, and I never looked back.
Yeah, I think I was horror was withheld from me when I was a child, so I think that's why I went neck deep into the real extreme stuff, like the French extremist movement and whatnot.
Oh.
So I was curious, just as kind of a goofy question to throw out there, what would you say the best decade was for horror?
Man, that's an awesome question. Well, I must admit there will be a degree of bias. I can't say it's the best, but there's a nostalgia element to the 80s, because I was introduced to the Friday the 13th series, the Nightmare on Elm Street series, the Halloween franchise. I was introduced to all those, and although they were horror, they were, I don't know, it was, Halloween was on Halloween Day. They played the marathon, showed almost all the movies. They didn't really spook me out too much, because I saw enough Michael Myers characters walking around, out trick-or-treating or just out, whatever. They didn't spook me out, but I almost equate it to a Christmas Story. Christmas, they're playing A Christmas Story all day long on TBS, TNT, whatever it is. And on Halloween, they're playing Halloween all day. So it's a holiday experience. It's just something you do. But, back to the question, I want to say it's between the 80s and the 90s. And I'm probably going to lean on the 90s, because of everything was better in the 90s. Sports, NBA basketball, Major League Baseball, maybe not football. Yeah, I'll even say football was pretty good, but I liked it in the 2000s as well. But music in the 90s, that's the last great decade, man. That's the last great.
Yeah.
Scream originated out of that.
Wasn't Seven? Was that later?
Yes.
Yes.
95.
95. Yes.
And what a stellar piece of work that is. I was just thinking about that the other day, that epic conclusion. That's masterpiece, man.
Absolutely.
Such a great movie. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. Every time I get to the end, it just packs a punch, man.
The philosophy involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
The planning, the plotting, and then the ultimate conclusion and, the lead up to it. And of course, it's almost like it's not ruined, even though you know the outcome, but it's almost amplified in a sense because you appreciate more of what he's saying. Kevin Spacey is saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter how many times I hear it when he says, become vengeance. Become, and then he says wrath, and it dawns on you, oh shit, this is oh my God, this is the seventh sin.
Oh, yeah. You appreciate it that much more, and it hits harder when he says it after you already know what's coming, Yeah. No, 7 was great. To tie it back into the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, they came out, they were just milking. They were just continuing to milk the cow with some of those sequels and, after the first one. But I will say, when Wes Craven got back involved and released Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and that was 94, I want to say, that was a great movie. Of course, it's more suited for if you're already a fan of the franchise, but great movie. They reinvented Freddy Krueger. I mean, he had this demonic, evil look about him. And, Craven's spin on the movie within a movie kind of take. I don't know if you saw it, but it was very clever. And it wasn't just another cheesy sequel, milking off the teat. You know what I mean? It was reimagined and all new, within that universe of Freddy Krueger and the Nightmare on Elm Street.
Did you ever see that movie Martyrs?
I did not.
People that listen to this podcast are going to start thinking I'm a broken record. As many times as I ask about that movie, it's a French film. It's from 2008. There was a remake in 2015 that just don't watch. But you talk about, it's got an ending that blows the ending in 7 away. Like, it is just so psychologically mind blowing. You've got to, it's part of the French extremist movement. So you've got to sit through some pretty brutal violence to get to the end, because the payoff isn't until like the last, I want to say 10 minutes of the movie. It just all comes together beautifully, just tied with this beautiful bow and put in your lap right at the end. Because you're wondering throughout the whole movie, what is going on? What is wrong with these sick, twisted people? But yeah, it's Martyrs 2008. It's a French film. You're going to have to, look at subtitles, but it's incredible.
I have no problem with subtitles. My
Unless you speak French.
For it. Yeah. I'll have to check that out, man.
What's the life of Braedon Riddick like outside of writing?
Dad life, man.
Dad life?
It is the dad life and, of course, work life. But, work life, of course, gets stressful and it's eventful. But I try not to complain about my profession because it affords me the opportunity to provide for my family. So you won't hear me complaining about that. But parenting is no doubt that is the challenge, because what I love about parenthood is it prevents me from getting complacent. I don't care how well you've accomplished a task any given day. The next day, there's going to be a new challenge. Do not rest on your laurels. Just because you got it figured out today, tomorrow is going to present a whole new challenge. And the chaos that can come about with parenting that's what keeps you on your toes. And blessed to have the two boys. Don't get me wrong. They will drive you crazy, in a pandemic. Yeah. And I've joked about it. Some of my readers have said, when are we going to get book number 2? the follow-up, I say, well, will you volunteer babysitting services? And absolutely, yeah, I'll come over and watch. I'm like, okay, all right, maybe not, but we'll see. But yeah, beyond that, my true passion, when the stars align and I'm able to get out there, I try to play golf when I have free time and I'm able to get away. That's my game now, man. That's the way I channel that competitive drive. And yeah, I'm not crazy about playing this time of year. I don't care for summertime at all, but and it's been nearing 100 degrees out there and humid.
Oh God.
And that's just, it's just not worth it, man, no. Because even if you find a way to have fun in the misery of the heat of the day, and the next day is when you pay for it, because it's the taxing effect. It's that cumulative effect that you're going to feel that you were out there in 100 degrees for 4 hours, and going to
systematically leach all the fluid out of your body.
Oh yes. And not to mention, you've got two boys who are begging you to throw them baseball, throw them football, and wrestle. And they're not hearing that you're taxed and you're gassed. They're ready to play.
You have the same recovery time as they do. There's no difference.
Yes. No excuses, Dad.
I hear you're a bit of a sushi connoisseur as well.
Man, to say I'm a connoisseur would be to say that I would discriminate against some type of sushi, and I don't discriminate against sushi. I love it. And that's something that, my wife was always so straight line in terms of traditional food she ate and just a traditional lifestyle she led in general. And I introduced her to sushi, and she never looked back. That's one of those things that we both enjoy. She's still rather finicky and has a picky palate, but sushi is that thing that anytime we get a chance, that date night pops up, it's sushi, man. I love it. How about you?
Yeah, I don't really get too out there, like nothing with tentacles or anything like that. But
none of the octopus sashimi?
No. I mean,
I know you've seen it though.
Oh yeah. I avoid it.
There's no mistaking what it is, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. That's why I'm like, I can't put that in my mouth. I'm sorry. Did
all the other sushi and the sashimi, it's like, I don't know what that is. But this purple and white piece of flesh with the suction cups, I know what that is.
That's just smooth flesh. This other thing is going to just, I've seen too many horror movies. I feel like it's going to be like Alien when something just blows out of my chest, some monster.
Oh, what a movie, by the way. Ridley Scott.
Did you ever see that Netflix documentary, Euro Dreams of Sushi?
I did not.
If you can find it, I don't know if it's still on Netflix or not, but it's about this 10-seat sushi bar that's in a Tokyo subway tunnel. And it, received 3 Michelin stars, but people make reservations for this place like months in advance. And Euro, this was in 2011 that this was released, and he was 85 at the time, so I'm sure he's passed by now, so I don't even know if it exists anymore. But he was so draconian about the standards that he kept. His sushi chefs, he would make them make egg sushi for years until he felt that they had got it right before he'd let them touch anything else. And there was a scene in the movie where his son and one of the guys that works for him went to a fish market, and they were there for like 2.5 hours and left with nothing because nothing measured up to their standards. So,
no kidding.
Yeah, it didn't dawn on me when Monica was saying how she's going to do a research fellowship in Japan for the summer. I was like, you need to find out if that sushi place still exists, because I think she's going to be either in or near Tokyo. So, but yeah, I would definitely.
She's traveling abroad. She's heading out there. Now, what's the name of this?
Euro, it's spelled Jiro. Euro Dreams of Sushi.
Euro Dreams of Sushi.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Noted.
Well, so as we bring the show to a close, you said that you haven't ruled out plans for future works. You did make mention that maybe something could come out that possibly deals with the origins of the tower. Is that what I remember correctly?
There's nothing concrete, but I want to leave that opportunity alive. And for one, let's face it, I do love certain things left open to interpretation. And in doing so, that's not just being elusive. I will not rule out. In fact, I've entertained an idea based around that, if not exploring more of the outer circle. And again, there's nothing concrete, but let's face it, brainstorming is where most of the important stuff happens, even before anything. The writing, to me, yes, you gotta do it, but it's finding the initial motivation to brainstorm enough and formulate a sense of a sound story in your mind before I can really get excited and start writing something. It's having some destination in mind, because I've started too many stories and just started writing free flow, stream of consciousness style deal, and just lost interest, and it's just abandoned. And I don't want to waste that kind of time anymore. I know what can happen when you set those mile markers, you set those distant buoys out there, you set targets, and whether you hit them or not, just have something to aim at, a general aiming point, and go from there. And, everything in season, man. Everything has its time and its season. And if the backstory behind the coming about of Ungodly doesn't, prove that I have patience, I'm not going to rush anything. And to the folks out there who do produce regularly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually, whatever that may be, tip of the cap. That's just not my style. I've mentioned Thomas Harris many times. I've got a few folks who I'm grateful for. I truly appreciate them, their readership and their encouragement. And they're like, I hope you're writing your next book. When are we going to get? And they're persistent about it. And I'm like, I'm okay right now. I said, the time isn't now in time. I said, you remember Thomas Harris? I said, yeah, I know Thomas Harris. But I'm talking about Braedon Riddick. I said, well, look, his first book he released compared to his next, it was 6 to 8 years. Okay. And 6 books in total over a 50-year span. So, do the math, divide it up a little bit. And clearly there was no annual release to expect, from Thomas Harris. And, I get it. Everything now in this cancel culture and consumerism, and of content, people want more now. They don't like to wait. And I understand that. And it's something I appreciate, but
no delayed right gratification.
Now, but right now writing and, the book writing is not in season. I'll say it like that. But down the road, for sure, man, because it doesn't just, especially now that so many people have validated this wicked brainchild of mine. And I'll never get over that. Because I never would have expected so many to have truly latched on to it and, reached out. Yeah, I played your summation of events, your very cool, clip that you recorded and released not that long ago. I played that for my wife and she was like, that is awesome. And his voice, he did it so well. You did, man. Bravo for that. That was awesome.
Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
So, just one final question. What would you say is the most important thing you want readers to take away from the book?
That there's always a way to overcome. There's always a way to win, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. That's what I took away from it at the end. When I finally got away from it. And again, I didn't go into it with hopes of delivering some altruistic message, some profound meaning. Now, that's not to say that profound meaning cannot come about or did not come about, but definitely I came away from the story with a sense of when there's purpose and there's passion involved and there's reason and motivation, no odds are insurmountable. You can find a way to win. That's not to say it's going to be rainbows and butterflies on the other side, but in the end, even with a few scars, it's a win.
Drop the mic on that one.
Should I throw these corded
no,
headphones
please
on the
don't. It'll be really loud. I've got noise canceling headphones on. It'll be really loud. So, well, I've had a blast. Thank you for joining me on the show. Had a great time talking with you, and I wish you continued success on the book and all areas of your life for that matter.
Vince, thank you so much for having me. This has been a treat, and your questions were absolutely stellar, so well articulated and insightful angles. And absolutely, right back to you. Nothing but the best. And I see you're active over there on Instagram. Look forward to chatting with you, and look forward to hearing some of this stellar podcast production you've got coming up for us.
And thank you to everyone that tuned in. All links are in the description. And if you want to support the work of the indie writing community, make sure to leave a review on Amazon. This is not only a positive reflection for the author, but the more reviews the author gets, the more visible they become in the search results when customers type in keywords. Stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.
I've been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never answer when I call, now I'm the one they call. I done been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Crazy when you really gotta get it out the mud. Ducking paparazzi ain't the same as ducking slugs. Keep your circle small cause they be faking with the love. And always have your own back if push come to shove. Mama said we been but never focus, they be watching. No matter how much they tell you to stop, don't never stop it. Coming from the trenches, we don't get too many options. The feds always got their eyes on you like you been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never answer when I call, now I'm the one they call. I done been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. I've been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never answer when I call, now I'm the one they call. I done been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. They say the views of Hollywood are amazing and you love it, but I've been doing super bad like Seth and McLovin. Trying to run the underground like Miss Harriet Tubman. Been playing tug of war all of my life, I can't stop tugging. Oh, you love me now? You wanna be friends and dap me up with no cold shoulders now? Like you weren't laughing at me back when I was down and out. You was the main one that always used to count me out. Dead prezzies, I've been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never answer when I call, now I'm the one they call. I done been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. I've been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never answer when I call, now I'm the one they call. I done been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Through thick and thin, I hope they ride to the end. Through thick and thin, I hope they ride to the end. I've been up and I've been down and I done seen it all. Was in the gym working my shot, now they pass me the ball. They never